things that weren't told. And I thought I'd start, what better place to start than in a brothel. So there's a famous bar slash roadhouse called the Washoe House up in Sonoma County. Has anyone ever been there? Well, you should go. Have you been there? All right. Most people in Sonoma County don't know its history, so this poem is for the ladies that used to work there. The Washoe House. House made of dawn, house made of thunderous hearts, bricked in, gone cement silent, mouths full of dust, walls still whirring, still breathing like hummingbird wings. Downstairs, you can still see the roadhouse and bar built in 1859, a dusty stop on the stagecoach route between Petaluma and Santa Rosa. Built on Roblar de Missoria, the house still straddles Washoe Creek. But rise up the stairs past the rose-flowered wallpaper, dollars flagging the ceiling like so many tongues, and the house quiets, closes in on you like deep water. As if the women who once pleasured passing men for a small pinch of gold dust were waiting on the other side of the walls, their breath fogging the glass between truth and what we choose to tell. So I grew up in Sebastopol, and a lot of this book centers around the history of the Gravenstein apple, and this poem is about how the Gravenstein apple got to Sonoma County. It actually began in Italy and then Denmark. Sweet bitter. In the 1700s, Prince Karl of Denmark eats Gravenstein apples while visiting the dappled shade in an orchard in Italy. Its rigid trunk offered the cuttings of an idea that would take to graft in his summer home, a white castle on the blue lip of the Baltic Sea. Seeds planted, then tended, until great orchards bloomed across the flat, low lands, where the sea seeps in slowly, where salt, like history, lingers on the air, tart sweetness bulging from a red-barred orb. 2. By the time the orchards grew into vast bounding fields, the Germanic spoken legends of the North Sea were receding like the tide, as were the resources. Entire islands of stories were swallowed whole in a storm. 3. For a century, gardeners cut and grafted the bone-barred heart of the fruit to perfection, until it tasted bittersweet enough, until it kept long enough to travel large distances. Then the seeds and cutting were slipped into the trunks of steamship passengers, tiny seedlings kept moist across long passages, until the Gravenstein seedling was carefully unwrapped from its moist burlap covering to be planted here in Sebastopol on freshly clear-cut hills that rolled to the sea. 4. In the 1850s, those who didn't find gold farmed. Orchards covered the bare hills as fast as they were cleared of scrub oak and pine and miwok. And the years seeped in, the horticulturists grafting to win a longer market, a higher yield. But what the apple bore was memory, a long-traveled bittersweet taste that can't be bred out or baked out or forgotten. Red lines that bind the fruit to the hands that pick, to the stories that still whisper on the low roll of a long-traveled sea where salt, like history, lingers on the air. You're a quiet crowd. I'm just going to read 2 more. This is about the naming of the town of Sebastopol. You all may not know the story, but It's a really famous story about how it was basically a battle of two men who had a fight, and one guy was keeping the other guy out of the general store. And so everybody in town got their chairs and sat down and watched them scream at each other, from one guy on the street, one guy inside the store. And so the town was called Pine Grove, and then after that they were like, well, this is like the Battle of Sebastopol in the Baltic, so that's the reference. The naming of Sebastopol in mud time. Frontier towns are built of new lumber, still sticky with sap, still fat with water. What you build in the past retracts, shows cracks, places where the wind can lick clean. Sebastopol is a town that dreams its name over and over again. The story goes, two men, Stevens and Hibbs, stood face to face on the main road in a town called Pine Grove. Anger erupted, fist to fist. They were up to their knees in mud. The naming is what happened after. Hibbs running away into Doherty's general store, Stevens following but stopped at the door. You ain't coming in. Instead, Stevens paced the muddy street outside the store as Hibbs hid inside. For hours, his feet rutted the deep mud with his story, until passers-by stopped and watched, until someone recalled the year-long siege of Sebastopol during the Crimean War, and the name stuck. From this incident, the town took its name, said early historian Robert Thompson, a source filled with cracks, no way to check 100-year-old facts. At the time of Sebastopol's naming, there were 6 other towns named Sebastopol. Was each born of a standoff? There is only the strength of a story built out of time, mud and pine, set solid enough in the ground to keep so many seasons later. And my last poem is my love poem to Sonoma County. And there's a reference to Nathaniel Griffith was the father of the Gravenstein apple, and he had 3 daughters. And one of those daughters painted this painting. That's the cover of my book. They graciously lent me it. And it's the Laguna de Santa Rosa, which is our largest watershed. The accidental pool. Nathaniel Griffith brought Luther Burbank to his orchard on the flat marshland of the Laguna. From his home, the trees spelled across the wide expanse in straight rows. Already they were good servants, yielding a ton of fruit each. But the season was short. Burbank had ideas for winter fruits, the Winterstein, still bittersweet tasting, but with tougher skin to withstand the frosts. The 3 girls could see the men on the porch as they sat in the skirt of soft grass surrounding the willow. Spring had covered the grass between rows of apple trees in yellow mustard. They made a game of following the strokes of color, the low freckle of mustard, the high powdery acacia, to the solitary exclamations of yellow iris crowning the front yard. Years later, after Burbank's experimental trees had failed, after the father had died and the green wooden farmhouse had burned to the ground, they would remember this inventory, how that day the golden lines had burned in them a tether to this land, and each day after they would try and pull themselves back. Thank you.